Hello, hello. Привет. That's pretty much it. I'm sorry. My English is bad, my Russian is worse. I'm only good at Spanish. Though, so I've been told that there's no need for translation, but please raise your hand, let us know anything that needs to be translated to Russian. I'll be happy to wait for that translation. I won't be doing it myself. So as you know, we're going to be doing a code demo because I think that this talk that it's about Postgres and Java. Please raise hands if you're not here for Postgres and Java. It's the last time to go out. No, it's not the last time, but okay. So you know where you are. The problem with the monitors is that I would like to show a lot of code, and you know, because talking for 3 hours after lunch, I think that's going to be pretty bad. In Spain we have siesta, you know, and I don't want you to sleep. Well, it might be good for you too, but at least that I'm here, and maybe I would like to give you some value out of Postgres and Java. So being that I won't speak for 3 hours, well, I will speak for 3 hours, but not showing only slides. I want to show you a lot of code. This code is open source, it's published on GitHub. I'll show you the URLs and everything. So I want to show code, and my computer should be back there, and I won't like to be typing, facing you all backwards. So we moved the computer here, and the only monitor available is this one. So there's no much seats left here, but I encourage all of you to move as forward as possible, because I'll try to make the font big, but in any case, I would like you to see the screen well. Anyway, if not, I'll point out to the code and the slides before starting, so you can also check the code and the slides online if you need it. So I'll do that just first for you to start doing this. So. I don't know if you can read that font. So on those two URLs, you may find on SlideShare, slideshare.net/8kdata, that's the name of my company. There you can find the slides for the presentation of today. The final URL, I don't know exactly, but if you look for the last one available, just uploaded some hours ago, that is the presentation for today. And then on GitHub, on the GitHub of our company again, github.com/8kdata, and then Java Postgres, you can find all the source code I'm gonna showing up today. So if you're especially if you're on the back, I encourage you to download the slides and check the code from there if you cannot see the screen well. All right, so let's get this started. I guess we'll be doing a break in the middle. If I'm wrong, there's a break in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's start with the presentation itself. A little bit about myself first. I am the CEO of a company called 8kdata, as you have already probably heard. Bonus points for one of you who guess the meaning of the name of our company. It has a meaning. I'll leave it there. We are a company that do research and development on databases. That's our main focus. Which is a nicer way of saying we do stupid things, but we have fun with them, trying to make new things with databases. And so we've done a couple of interesting projects. We love Postgres. We've been using Postgres for more than a decade. And so most of the things we do are around Postgres. And one of the things that we do is we have created a database called ToroDB. Toro means bull in Spanish. It is the first open source database done in Spain, and that's why the name.
And ToroDB is a database that merges together the SQL world, the Postgres world, and the NoSQL world. It is basically a database that is compatible with MongoDB, but stores data in Postgres in a relational fashion. So, this is one example of the kind of crazy things that we do. If this, by the way, would sound interesting to you, there's another talk I will be doing tomorrow morning, 11 a.m., if I recall correctly, which is basically about helping people that are in MongoDB migrate to Postgres. And that has its own challenges, and thanks to the solution that is open source that we are doing, it's significantly easier. And this opens, if you work as a Postgres consultant or you provide services for the Postgres world, this could be a very useful tool for you, because there's many people on the MongoDB side that want to migrate back or migrate off to Postgres for several reasons. And this would be a very interesting tool. So if you're interested, I would like you to see it tomorrow, 11 a.m. On this talk, migrating off of MongoDB to Postgres is the name. So this is, again, the kind of things that we do. We also offer services like consulting, training, and especially support for Postgres as a company. And well, here you can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. So just feel free to shout, to ask any question. I'll be happy to answer as soon as possible, especially, of course, here. Which, by the way, don't feel threatened to ask any question. Whatever, even we're going to be talking about Java, I'll ask you about your level of experience. But even if you think you're a beginner or you just have a very simple question and you think this is stupid, and then you're not going to do it because you think you're going to, be shameful in front of everybody, please do the question. Because first of all, we are all here tolerant. Second, it might not be such a stupid question. Indeed, it might be a very smart question that none of us know the answer. And we will research on that. So please do any question. I'll be happy to answer. If you ask the question in Russian, it will be translated. Otherwise, I would only be able to answer нет. All right. So with all that said, I would like to ask you questions first. So how many of you do use Java and Postgres here? OK. So out of those that use Postgres and Java, how many of you are just starting or are Java beginner level? Okay, a few. Let's say intermediate level. Maybe advanced. Okay, okay. Just a few and someone who wasn't sure. And out of those of you who don't use Postgres and Java, why are you here? No, it was a joke. So I'm very happy to see you here, but do you plan, I guess, to use Postgres and Java, right? So then if you have any question about Java, even though it's not specifically Postgres related, but I'll be touching here on advanced topics. So if there's any question, please let me know, because there's many tutorials on basic stuff, and I won't focus on that because that you can find elsewhere. I'll be touching on deep topics. So if there's any question, please stop me. I'll be happy to work on that. I have tons of material, so I'm happy to stop at any point and dig deeper there. So the main topic about this tutorial is to provide a general overview about, again, of course, Postgres and Java. And one of the main takeaway for you today would be take a lot of care of the documentation that you find on the internet. Why? Because specifically on this topic, Postgres and Java, it is typically very old. It is outdated. And many of the examples I have seen are indeed very bad. They follow very bad practices. Why? Well, because the code style has evolved significantly over time. Java is a language that is old language, but even though it has evolved significantly, old code still works. And so there's a lot of information that came up in the early eras of Postgres and Java and has stayed in the internet since. And it's still the most referenced information because the way the search engines lead to indexing pages. And so it's sometimes a problem because you find really old code with really old, or let's say no new best practices. So just take care with that. Take all the code you find on the internet with a grain of salt. I'm not saying definitely my code here is going to be the best ever. But at least we have been taking care of it a lot significantly. The other reason why there's bad practices and not very good examples in the internet is also because Java and specifically JDBC, which is the most used interface to interact with the database, it is very verbose. There's many things that you need to do. There's many exceptions that you need to handle. And some people, when they want to create an example, they want to make it very simple. And then they remove parts of it. They remove exception handling, which I believe is very important. So they're left apart as a second thought, and that becomes a bad practice. So again, the summary, just take everything you see on the internet regarding this with a grain of salt. I'll try to give you here good practices. The other takeaway is that probably 99 or let's say even 100% of your time, you're going to be doing Postgres with JDBC driver, with what it's called the official JDBC driver, and more or less very simple stuff. Not as your program, but using basic capabilities, and that's totally fine. No problem with that. However, I would like to show you that there is more out there, that there's more options to connect to Postgres, that there's more JDBC drivers than the official drivers, that there's all the ways to connect to Postgres that are not official JDBC drivers, that there's, of course, connection poolers, which should not be a second thought, but something you can leverage on, that there's techniques to improve the performance of the code. That's what I'm going to be talking about. Even though maybe tomorrow you may not be using all of these things, but at least you will know that they exist, and you will understand the trade-offs. So I'll present several solutions. All right, so again, let's start. First things first. We're going to talk about several ideas, but I'll jump over them first. So just to introduce the topic, this Postgres and Java, Java and Postgres. So these are two different technologies, right? And the first question is, do they mix well? Are they good partners? If you look at the numbers, it might look like they are not really good partners indeed. For example, if you take the JDBC Postgres mailing list, the mailing list where all the development and usage of the official driver, and you look at it, it is not very heavy trafficked. This is, honestly, these numbers are low. I mean, today are bigger. Have not updated them, I'm sorry about that. But typically, some months ago, 1 year ago, there was a couple of messages per day on average. Right now, there might be more, maybe 5 or 10, but still, it is not a very heavy traffic mailing list, which you would expect from the official Java support on Postgres, to be a lot of people interacting. So, might be that there's something there that doesn't work very well. Or if you look at PL Java, which is another topic we're going to be touching on today, PL Java started very strong many years ago as a project to run Java code inside the database, which is a very cool idea. And then the project stalled for so many years. Fortunately, it came back last year. And PL Java got a new release after, I think, 6 or 7 years. So that's cool. It came back to life. But it was, for some time, a little bit stalled as a project. So, there's some hints there that this may not work very well, this stuff with Postgres and Java. And of course, Java is not the cool guy out there, right? There's all the hipster languages. There's JavaScript, there's Ruby, there's Rust, there's Go. There's all these languages that are the new cool kids, right? So, seems like old and outdated. Even more, Postgres is written in C, of course, and there's APIs for C. So there's way to create extensions. There's way to interact with the Postgres code base. You can extend the query planner. You can add new index methods. There's many things you can do with Postgres in C. So there's no APIs for Java. For example, you can do some things with Python because Python and C work more or less well together. But there's no APIs, database APIs for Postgres. Some other databases have some limited forms of APIs for interacting with the database, directly with the database, with Java, but not in Postgres side. And also there's this feeling that some people say that, that Java implies that you're going to be using an ORM. You're using an ORM, that's going to be, you're going to be using Hibernate. And as long as everybody knows that Hibernate sucks, well, then Java sucks. I'm necessarily not agreeing with that. Maybe some of those statements, but I won't reveal which. But this is a general perception. So this is the bad picture I present to you. But let's analyze, because this is just subjective, right? This is opinion. Let's look at the numbers. And the numbers are much more interesting. So for example, we all know it is arguably Java, it is the enterprise language. It is the language more used at the enterprise level. It is probably the language used the most to interact with a Postgres database. Because Java is used, again, is very widespread, is pervasive across the enterprises. And of course, many startups too, we'll see later. But definitely on an enterprise level. And enterprises, rule the world. And Postgres, if used, is very likely going to be used from Java. So it is very important. Needless to say, both technologies are very mature, are very reliable, are trusted. That's why, again, enterprises use them, because they can trust both. So they're really, really, really good partners. I'm not saying anything against Python, for example, but Python APIs evolve very significantly. They're not very stable. And this is not well seen by companies that want stability on their services, on their APIs. So it has its own advantages, of course, but they want stability. So it is a very mature, it is a very reliable solution. And now let's, again, picture this into numbers. So if we measure code popularity, probably you cannot see the numbers, but I'll tell you to them. As of today, March of 2017, Java is the #1 language in terms of popularity, at least based on this popularity contest called TIOB Index. And it's been there since many years. It's been always fighting between the first and the second spot, but since 3 years ago, it gained the #1 spot, and the difference in terms of percentage against the second one, which is C, it is 9 points. So it's a significant difference. It is the clear leader for 2-3 years in a row as the most popular language under this index. It also was in 2007. So it's been for many, many years #1, and only a few years the #2, and now with a significant difference. But maybe TIOB index is based on some data about jobs, and that might be a little bit offset by enterprise support and so on. But what about all the sites like GitHub, for example? GitHub, open source, so is Java used on the startups? Is Java used on the small places? Is Java used on the hipster places like GitHub? Well, yes, it is. In this case, it's not the second language. It's not the first. It is the second, only after JavaScript. It's, of course, the coolest language there, right? But, it makes it very significant, even more than Ruby or Python or PHP, that everybody would think are the kings on GitHub. So it is very used everywhere. So, yes, the answer is we can work with Postgres and Java. They're very good partners. They're both mature, reliable, very widely used. There's wide support, and it is a really great solution to build applications with Postgres. So let's start with it. Let's talk about how to connect to Postgres from Java. Any questions so far? All good? All right. So there's more than one way to connect to Postgres from Java. Typically, everybody, and as I said before, almost very likely that in the end, you'll be using JDBC, which is a de facto standard for connecting to relational databases from Java, using the official driver for Postgres, and that's it. End of the picture. Now, at least, I'm going to present you some other methods of connecting to Postgres from Java. And not only those. So the first one is there's an alternative driver alternative JDBC driver to connect to Postgres from Java, which is called PGJDBC NG, next generation. So the official driver is called PGJDBC, and this is /ng, as it stands for next generation. It is drop-in replacement. It is compatible with JDBC spec, so you can just swap the official driver, use the new driver, and code should work. You may only need to change the URL that you used to connect to the driver, to the database, and that's it. So there you go. That's a very simple option. You may have some advantages, may have some disadvantages, but it's there. So there's another alternative. There is an attempt, to be honest, a little bit stalled, but I'll talk a little bit about it, to build a new driver, which is the non-JDBC driver, which is called Phoebe. It is a project that was started by my own company and some other contributors. And it's looking for volunteers to continue that effort. But the idea was to build a non-JDBC API to interact with Postgres, to expose many of the advanced capabilities that Postgres as a database has that are not exposed over JDBC, and using a purely asynchronous by design driver, whereas JDBC is typically synchronous. So that's another option. It's not working as of today, but maybe working tomorrow. Then there's a little bit of more crazy ideas. Do you know this API in Java called Process Builder? Anyone? Yes? Okay. So that's used to execute a process externally. So you can use that to call PSQL and execute things from there. And you may be laughing, as some of you are. However, that might be interesting for some use cases. And I'll show you why we had to use this scheme on one project in the past. And it was the only way to go through. So yes, there's ways for doing that. Then in Java, there's also GNI, right? Do you know GNI technology in Java? Java, sorry?
Java native.
Yes, Java native interface. Just for me to know, can you raise hands who know this technology? Okay. So GNI allows you to call C code from Java. And so in Postgres, there's a library in C that interacts with the database, which is called EPQ. So theoretically, it would be possible to wrap this C code in Java and call it from Java. And that is indeed the case. And it also can be used to interact with Postgres and has been used in some places. So, you know, another way to interact. And of course, you know, the protocol that Postgres uses to communicate with the clients, it is open, it's documented. So you can write your own driver. And it's, well, it's not easy, but it's not that difficult. So there's many options, many things you can do. But let's start from the beginning. So let's look at the official driver, the JDBC, the de facto standard in Java. JDBC, which basically stands for Java Database Connectivity, has been here for a long, long time. It is available since Java 1.1, which, if you recall, is very old. We're talking about the 1998, if I recall correctly. The current version of the JDBC spec implemented in the JDBC driver is 4.2, which requires you to use Java 8. You can use the driver with previous versions of the JDBC spec if you're targeting a lower Java. But out of those who use here Java, how many of you use Java 8? 7? 6? Less than 6? Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Anyway, the main idea about this JDBC driver, it is, of course, to provide the necessary abstractions to interact with any database. So most of the documentation you may see in the internet about JDBC will also apply to Postgres, because the idea is that this is database independent, which is pretty cool, except for, of course, the statements you run. For you to understand the driver, based on the JDBC spec, there is if you would implement a JDBC driver, there's like 2 layers. One layer is the database independent implementation of the driver, and then there is the database dependent implementation of the driver, which basically speaks the native database protocol. This is something you should not worry about unless you're writing a driver. If you're just using an application, writing an application, you just target the API, and everything will be done for you, which is very nice. For you to understand, there's several types of JDBC drivers. I don't know if you're aware of this, but just again, raise hands if you know what is the different types of drivers in the JDBC spec. Type 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, well, I'll go through that. So basically, there's different ways of building a JDBC driver. Again, as I said, the driver has an database independent part, which is direct implementation of the JDBC spec APIs, and a database dependent part. And basically, depending on how do you implement this database dependent part, you may end up with different database JDBC types of drivers. The type 1, when it's called the type 1, it is basically a wrapper over an existing ODBC driver. So let's say there's a database which has already an existing ODBC driver. Then you wrap this ODBC with Java code, which is possible with certain technologies, and you have a JDBC driver. Well, of course, that conversion is non-trivial, but in that regards, the JDBC and the ODBC specs are not that much different, so it could be done. So this type 1 driver basically has I don't know if you can see from the back part, but basically there's on top of the database, there would be a client library that interacts with the ODBC driver, then the ODBC driver, and then the bridge between JDBC and ODBC. This would be a type 1 driver. The type 2 would be something similar to what I was saying before of taking a driver which is a non-Java driver, like for example in Postgres libpq, and wrapping it with Java code. So you're calling a native driver, might be shipped with a database like, again, libpq, and then exposing it through Java. And this would be a type 2 driver. A type 3 driver is one that is using some middleware. So let's imagine a middleware that would translate database calls from, it's typically used on what it's called meta drivers that are able to talk to several databases, and they expose a common API. So the type 3 driver implements this API and in following, of course, the JDBC spec, and then talks to the middleware, and it's the middleware that talks to the database. This is a type 3 driver. Honestly, there's almost none of these actually, type 3 drivers. And type 4, it is the native driver. It is the driver that is pure Java and directly communicates with the database, implementing the API, the protocol of the database. And typically type 4 drivers are the most interesting and powerful ones. And Postgres JDBC driver, it is a type 4, which means it is the best possible out of those. And it's a direct implementation of the Postgres protocol from Java. It's pure Java, doesn't have any OS independent libraries like you would probably have if you would be using a type 1 or type 3 driver. Type 1 or type 2 driver. And again, it works very well. So this is, for you to know, there's JDBC driver is a type 4 driver. Where to get this driver from? You get this driver from jdbc.postgresql.org. This is the official driver. There's other drivers available that are, so among the JDBC spec, in order to connect to Postgres, there's the official driver, again, that you can get if you go to jdbc.postgresql.org. Then there is the next generation driver that I talked a little bit about before, and I'll talk a little bit about later. This is a drop-in replacement. And there are also other JDBC drivers available to give even more options for you. There's EnterpriseDB JDBC driver, but in this case, it's not very much different. It is a slightly modified driver that comes with EnterpriseDB's own proprietary version of Postgres. And there's also a commercial driver for Postgres, a commercial JDBC driver, which I don't know if you have heard of it before. It's called Progress Data Direct. Anyone has heard of it before? No. Okay. It is a commercial driver for Postgres. This company, Progress Data Direct, offers drivers for many databases. typically following ODBC or JDBC specs, and there's one for Postgres from this company called Progress. Surprisingly, it is a type 5 driver. Unfortunately, I cannot explain you what is a type 5 driver because I don't know. It's not on Wikipedia, which of course, you know, it's the source of truth of this universe. So I cannot explain, but you can check on their website. There's some explanations. I still don't understand completely what it is, but it's better than a type 4. So, you know, there's that commercial option available. If in doubt, if you have any question, you know, the safest choice, go for the official driver, which is official in no sense, just because it's developed by a majority of the community. But let's call it unofficially the official driver. And if in doubt, just use that one, jdbc.postgresql.org, and you're good to go. And that will probably cover 99% of your use cases. One good thing about this driver, and most of them, is that you can use it from Maven. Who uses Maven here? Raise hands, or equivalent. Okay. Who uses Ant? Who uses no building technology? Okay. Well, for those of you who use Maven or equivalent, of course the driver is built into typical coordinates, so you can just point to the group org.postgresql and artifact PostgreSQL and just import the driver and you're good to go. The driver supports most of the characteristics that Postgres supports, but not all of them. I'll point to some of those that are not implemented. But for example, in terms of authentication methods, the usual suspects are implemented. Postgres 10 will also come with Scrum support, with initial Scrum authentication method support. And there's already some ongoing efforts to also implement Scrum support on the JDBC driver. So that will typically be used. If you use the JDBC driver, I strongly recommend you to use UTF-8 in your database. I strongly recommend you to use UTF-8 in your database anyway, but specifically if you use Java, because, you know, makes sense with the character encoding used internally also in Java. And also the driver speaks both the old Postgres protocol version called version 2 and the current version called 3 that came with Postgres 7.4. So can go back to typically old versions of Postgres, except for the new version of the driver. I'll talk about that just now. Some other characteristics about this driver, it mainly uses the text mode of the protocol. The Postgres protocol, the protocol that Postgres uses to communicate from the client to the server, has two modes, binary mode and the text mode. So this JDBC driver mostly uses the text mode, although you can use the binary mode for some things too. The driver also presents some capabilities that are non-standard, and this makes a lot of sense because the JDBC spec, it is of course too common, and there are some specific characteristics about the databases that are not exposed by the JDBC spec. So the Postgres driver had to expose these capabilities in the driver outside of the JDBC spec. Like for example, the copy mode. Copy mode, do you use copy mode in Postgres? Okay. Well, the copy mode is an efficient way to import or export data. It is a mechanism for fast import, fast export. You can export in text mode, in CSV mode, or similar modes. And this is not part of the JDBC spec, but the driver has this mode, and I'll show you some code also to see how it can be used from Java. It's very useful. So how do you use the driver? Very easily, just connect using this URL, jdbc:/PostgreSQL:, and then // and then the usual host, port, database part of the URL. And this is part of the JDBC spec. The only particular thing is the name of the protocol. This is jdbc:/PostgreSQL. The latest version of the driver, and this is important to point out, because there's been some confusion in the last months, years, about the numbering scheme of the JDBC driver. And I want to make it very clear here. From now on, as of 20th of February, the driver version is called, the current version of the driver is 42. Yes, that number. And the next version will be 43, and the next version will be 44, and so on, until the universe collapses, probably. So from now on, please use version 42 forward, unless you have a specific reason not to use anything below. Now, if you want to know the story below, the previous version was 9.4 dash some number, like the last version was 9.4 1211 or something like that. And before that was 9.4 something else. And so it created a lot of confusion because could you use the driver 9.4-1211 with Postgres 9.6? And the answer is yes. So the question here is that the driver version and the database version are not linked. However, based on the previous numbering scheme, they seem to be linked where they weren't. So they decided to change the versioning number so that now it is completely independent on the server version. And as long as 10 was going to be Postgres next version, they jumped from 9.4 to 42. Okay? This 42nd version of the driver, at least version 42, also dropped support for some older versions of Postgres, which is version, I think 8.2, it's not on the slides. But so if you're using Postgres less than 8.2, like 8.1 or less, you will probably need to use the older version of the driver, the 9.4 dash whatever. Other than that, you would probably want to use this driver with this version. So also if you're using JDBC with a version lower than this, I recommend you to switch to this driver version. Okay, so let's get dirty. Let's see some code. Any question?
Can I use the current JDBC driver, this official driver, for some upcoming version of Postgres?
Okay, so the question is if you can use the current version of the JDBC driver with future versions of Postgres.
If I build the version myself.
If you, sorry?
If I build upcoming 9.10 or maybe 10 version.
Yeah. So the next version of Postgres is going to be called Postgres 10. And then 11, and then 12. Yeah, well, there's going to be 10.0, 10.1, 10.2, but then the next major version will be 11, the next major version will be 12. So can you use current driver with those versions of Postgres? The answer is, as long as those major versions of Postgres don't change the protocol, and then they don't make it the current protocol version, which is called version 3. I'm talking about the protocol version, the version of the protocol that uses to communicate server and clients. As long as they don't change the protocol in a way that is incompatible, which won't happen, or gets deprecated, which won't happen in a long time, yes, you will be able to use this driver with future versions of Postgres. There are some ongoing talks to create version 4 of the protocol. That won't happen in 10 for sure, may happen in 11 and 12, and by then, protocol version 3 will be still supported. As of today, version 2 is still supported, and version 3 came by Postgres of 7.4, which was many, many years ago. So I envision that protocol version 3 will be working for, let's say, more than 5 years, if not more than 10. So yes, you'll be able to use the driver for a long time. But I'm sure the driver will catch up also with the new protocol version if it comes up. Indeed, many of the changes that have been requested to add to the protocol come from suggestions from the JDBC community. So in the JDBC community, we want to add new features to the protocol.
Are there many bugs around JDBC driver?
So there are many bugs around JDBC driver. Well, type of bugs that you may encounter frequently, I would say absolutely not. In my company, we've been using JDBC driver for a long, long time.
So I strongly advise to upgrade to latest.
Okay, so why then I advise to upgrade to the latest? Well, basically for a practical reason, because if you look at the changelog, there's no many significant features added to this version, except for the logical replication support, which I'll talk about later. The other ones are normal release cycles capabilities.
So there is no crucial bugs.
There is no crucial bugs reported on this version. There has been some significant advancement in previous version of the drivers. So the Postgres JDBC driver has evolved very significantly in the last year and a half, 2 years. So if you have anything older than that, then you should absolutely upgrade and you'll find significant advances. If you're not, just because of the version numbering has changed. And developers were previously confused about the versioning numbers. I would encourage you to move on to 42, and then from there, the version is going to be consistent, there's going to be semantic versioning, and the upgrade cycle will be easier for everybody. That's why I encourage that.
And is there any fast support for community if I encounter some bug in production?
So the question is whether there's support from the community if there's bugs on the drive.
Come and see what's happening on the server.
Yeah, so there's two kinds of support in the Postgres community. Those provided by the things like the mailing list, IRC channels, or Slack channels, and all of those is just a matter of will. You can ask there, and typically people are very responsive, so you'll typically get an answer. Now, if you want this professional support, then you'll need to get in touch with the companies that offer professional support, and I'm sure you'll get support for JDBC drivers also for your use case. If you would ask me, but I'm of course biased here, my company does offer that support. I guess all the companies would also offer that support.
Is it possible to catch rise messages like it shows in PHP during executing of some PGConfRu code?
So the kind of exceptions you get into the...
Not exceptions, messages, right? Not tests.
Okay, so the question is whether you're able to get the log messages that are sent to the client by the servers, right?
Yes, during the execution of query.
Yeah, during the execution of queries. So based on the JDBC spec, those messages get caught and translated to SQL exceptions by the JDBC standard. So because the JDBC spec, it is database independent. So all these messages may or may not appear on different databases and might be different. So all of these messages are typically sent as errors or not errors that get caught by the JDBC spec itself, and then they may be exposed as SQL exceptions or not, depending on the severity of the level, and then you may unwrap that SQL exception to a lower exception specific for Postgres, and then infer the message out there. But if you're really looking into getting some information, maybe asynchronously from those sources, what I would recommend you is to use the listen notify mechanism, which would be more powerful to accomplish that task.
You can use, as I remember, you can use change the log level inside the JDBC driver, and you can see more detailed messages from server.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a parameter in the URL of the JDBC driver to change the verbosity of the log messages. But those are still log messages.
Do you consider a asynchronous version of Postgres driver as applicable for production?
So the question is whether I consider the asynchronous version of the Postgres driver suitable for production use. I mentioned that there is an effort to build an asynchronous driver called Phoebe. That one is not even finished, so it doesn't even work as of today. So of course not. There is other options I didn't mention here today about the synchronous drivers for Postgres, which are basically, there's one called ACE, what was it called? It's built by one person called Mauricio. So if you look for Mauricio Postgres async, you'll find the driver. And it's a driver, it's an asynchronous driver both for MySQL and Postgres, but I cannot say whether it's suitable for production use. I haven't heard of any case. I think it's a cool idea, but I don't know if it's been used so far. And I also have seen one asynchronous driver on top of any JDBC driver. So you take any existing JDBC driver, and there's one driver that turns into an async API, which is basically a way of doing your own async version of JDBC, but in a general way. I don't think that would significantly hamper your capabilities, but I haven't seen it using in production. Now, I really believe there is a case for an asynchronous driver. Postgres protocol itself, it is completely asynchronous. And even though it's ordered, but it's asynchronous. And there's then JDBC API, which is an API designed in the 90s, and it's completely asynchronous. So it's a shame that the spec itself is limiting the capabilities of the database in this area. So I see a lot of potential in building this kind of drivers, but they're not there yet, unfortunately.
So what about listening notifications? Are they asynchronous too? So should
Yeah.
they be storing?
Yeah, so if you talk about listen notify mechanism in Postgres, it is completely asynchronous. So yes, you can use it for any asynchronous notification. Basically, they will be sent back by the server at any time.
And by JDBC?
And the thing is that there's no, as far as I know, there's no specific support for listen notify on the JDBC driver. I might be wrong. I think there's a way, but there's some glue required. But that, I'm not 100% sure. I'll need to check. I don't know if anyone knows, if anyone has been using listen notify from Java. Okay, well, we'll check. But I think it's not included per se. More questions so far? Okay, so let's look at some code. I'm gonna take a seat, I'm sorry for that. But otherwise I'll be, or maybe I'll try not to type a lot.